today, Congresswoman Karen Bass, Congressman Tony Cárdenas, and Congressman Bruce Westerman, who've been working in a bipartisan fashion to make sure that the way we treat children in the justice system is fundamentally changed after this Congress. Before we get started and I transition into the introduction and we get into the show, I wanted to make sure that we provided a little bit of context for what we're doing here today, which is essentially unveiling one of the most sweeping and significant criminal justice reform packages focused on children in the history of the United States. This day was needed in part because of decade-long policies that have been in place that have disregarded child status. In the early 1990s, the states began passing laws that made it easier to transfer children into the adult criminal justice system. These policies exposed children to harsh sentences, including mandatory minimums and extreme punishments like the death penalty and life without parole. Today, we're still living with the tragic consequences of those wrong-headed policies. Last year alone, or in 2019 rather, there were over 700,000 children who were arrested in the United States. More than 200,000 of those children were 14 years of age or younger. Sadly, we did not account, and the criminal justice system does not take into consideration their child status or the fact that most of these children have been exposed to significant amounts of trauma. An OJJDP study back in 2012 found that the vast majority of youth who come into the criminal justice system have experienced at least 5 traumatic events. These studies have been replicated over the course of time, where we see studies showing that at least 90% of youth in our juvenile justice facilities have experienced at least 2 adverse childhood experiences, with many experiencing 4 or 5 or more. This includes issues like having experienced childhood abuse, sexual and physical, as well as having to live with a parent who suffers from mental illness or substance abuse issues. So these children that we're talking about, our children in the criminal justice system, are among the most vulnerable and marginalized children in our society. Last year alone, and every year, there are roughly 76,000 children who are prosecuted in the adult criminal justice system. 83% of those children are racial minorities. On any given night in the United States, we have 3,400 children who are placed in adult jails and 700 children who are placed in adult prisons. 83% of those children are Black. The significance of this moment cannot be understated. In 2020, Human Rights for Kids released the first ever National State Ratings Report, where we analyzed the presence or absence of 12 categories of law that were directly informed by the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child to essentially provide a blueprint to policymakers at the state and federal level to demonstrate the human rights protections that need to be in place and that are universally accepted the world over. What we found was startling. The United States is currently engaged in the largest government-sanctioned human rights abuse in the world today. This is why we are here, to address these grievous wrongs, to make sure that no child is denied hope or the possibility of redemption, that every child has their constitutional rights protected, regardless of what they've done or been accused of doing, to make sure that we essentially treat children like children. It is against that backdrop that I have the distinct honor and pleasure to introduce our first panelist and speaker, who will talk about her significant legislation to change the way that children are treated. Congresswoman Karen Bass was reelected to her 6th term, representing the 37th Congressional District in November of 2020. Congresswoman Bass has served as the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus in 2019 and 2020, where she oversaw and led a collaborative effort with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, the Asian Pacific Islander Caucus, and Native American caucuses to demand a targeted response to the COVID-19 pandemic and initiate a national needs assessment for communities of color. As a member of the Judiciary Committee, she has also helped to spearhead efforts to pass significant criminal justice reform, including the First Step Act, and has brought attention to the treatment of women, specifically in the criminal justice system. Upon arriving in Congress, Chairwoman Bass founded the Bipartisan Congressional Caucus on Foster Youth. The caucus has a membership of more than 150 members of Congress who are dedicated to improving the child welfare system and has successfully promoted the passage of key pieces of legislation. Prior to her election in Congress, Congresswoman Bass served in the California State Senate, where in 2008 she made history as the first African-American woman to be elected Speaker of the House in any body in the United States. She has been a fierce champion for children who've been forgotten and disavowed by the vast majority of society. And we couldn't be more honored or proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with her today as she introduces and unveils one of the most important pieces of legislation in this bipartisan package. Please join me in welcoming Congresswoman Karen Bass.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for including me, Mr. Dole. I just have to say that your opening comments are devastating. And I love the fact that your organization is called Human Rights for Kids, because as you so appropriately described, this is a human rights issue. And frankly, it is a stain on our country, what we do to children. And I have to acknowledge my colleague, Representative Cardinis. Representative Cardinis has been leading on this issue I know of for more than 20 years. What he did when he was in the state legislature, on the city council, and then of course walking into Congress and leading the way on these issues. It is time, as our country has begun to address criminal justice reform. Typically, we really are only talking about adult males. We have neglected the issue in terms of women and children. And so I'm so grateful to be a part of this today. So I'm introducing, along with my colleagues, the Childhood Offenders Rehabilitation and Safety Act of 2021, which updates and improves our federal juvenile crime laws. So these laws from the 1990s are outdated. They never should have happened to begin with, and they're certainly outdated now. They were a product of the tough on crime period that really racialized fear-mongering. At the time, people predicted and talked about super predators and said that crime would increase unless we were more punitive. But those predictions have absolutely been wrong. Since then, research has proven that punishing children the way we punish adults does not advance public safety. Research shows key developmental differences between youth and adults that impact their decision-making, impulse control, and susceptibility to peer pressure. These differences don't excuse youth from the responsibility for their actions, but they require a different approach. Children under 12 have less ability to understand and participate in court proceedings that frankly sometimes are difficult for adults to understand. And research shows that the youngest ages, unfortunately, Black children are even more overrepresented in the justice system compared to older youth. And prosecuting children under 12 is detrimental and is state-sponsored abuse. I would add to state-sponsored human rights abuse. Formal justice proceedings can be harmful to children's health and development, with negative physical and mental health impacts that can be observed for a lifetime. Now, we know as young people mature, they're less likely to reoffend. So that means locking children up for years extends incarceration beyond the time that you could supposedly rehabilitate them, but I would question whether we rehabilitate children when we incarcerate them at all. So this bill takes concrete steps to reform our system. It clarifies that in the federal court, children under the age of 13 are not prosecuted. It raises the age that a child could be prosecuted in adult proceedings from 15 to 16. And it provides safeguards for juveniles in federal jurisdiction against the negative effects of extended incarceration or confinement with adults by taking into consideration at sentencing evidence of childhood trauma, involvement in foster care, and the best interests of children. And it prohibits placement of juveniles in federal adult correctional facilities. I might add, when we take the step and say we don't want juveniles in adult facilities, sometimes we wind up putting them in solitary confinement, supposedly to protect them, which in my mind is another form of torture. After decades of increasingly punitive and failed juvenile justice policies, it's time to take a step in the direction that recognizes that children are different than adults and have enormous potential for rehabilitation, change, and growth. And we can do so much better than what we do now. So I want to thank my colleagues, and I also want to thank all of the other organizations that are involved in this effort. Thank you so much for your leadership.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Bass. And if I could, I'd stand up and give you a round of applause. That was really remarkable. And we just so appreciate your leadership on these issues. And we look forward to making sure that your bills become law.
Thank you.
Next up, I'm going to introduce Congressman Bruce Westerman, who unfortunately is not able to be with us today. He's provided a brief video that we're going to share. Congressman Westerman is serving in his 4th term as a representative of Arkansas's 4th Congressional District. He has in the past introduced legislation to ban life without parole sentences for children, make sure that child sex crime victims are protected so that they do not face lengthy prison sentences for committing acts of violence or crimes against their abusers, and to make sure that judges have greater flexibility when sentencing children and are allowed to deviate from harsh mandatory minimum sentences. His bill is in line with legal protections that have been embraced in both California and Arkansas, which shows the great geographic and political diversity by which these reforms have been embraced by Republicans and Democrats alike. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and then cue up this video by Congressman Bruce Westerman. So folks should now be able to see my screen. And here we go.
Greetings. I'm Congressman Bruce Westerman from Arkansas's 4th District, and I'm honored to be here today as a co-sponsor of bipartisan legislation to address the juvenile justice system. I became interested in this issue when I heard the story of Sarah Kruzan. At 11 years old, Sarah was groomed to be sex trafficked. By the age of 17, she had been abused and trafficked. She killed her abuser and was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. This is an injustice, and after Sarah spent over 20 years behind bars, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger commuted her sentence. The Supreme Court says that we should not be sentencing juveniles to life without parole. And Sarah's law addresses that issue, and it also gives judges opportunities to use judgment in sentencing. Again, I'm honored to be here with people on both sides of the aisle, working for justice, working for the future for people like Sarah who shouldn't have to go through what she went through.
Okay. I think it's important to note, I want to just thank Congressman Westerman for providing that statement, and he apologizes again for not being able to be here in person. He remains committed to this bipartisan work and this bipartisan coalition. Oh, hold on one second. I'm so sorry. Oh, okay. Okay. So I just want to thank Congressman Westerman again for being a part of this coalition. I also just want to note that one of the important things to take away from his legislation is that the same kids that were failing in the child welfare system are the same kids that end up in our juvenile justice system and the same kids in our criminal justice system. There's been this tendency to compartmentalize these children, to think of them in one silo or the other. But the reality is that kids who experience severe trauma and abuse end up in our justice systems, and we've just failed them, and that failure has been compounded by the trauma that they've experienced, first from being abused and neglected, and then from the harm that they experience in the criminal justice system. And so that provision is so important to give judges greater flexibility to craft age-appropriate and trauma-informed responses, and to end the practice of sentencing children to die in prison, where the United States is the only country in the world that does that. So next up, I am incredibly honored to introduce our last member of Congress who's going to be speaking today, Congressman Tony Cárdenas. Congressman Cardinis, as Congresswoman Bass had mentioned earlier, has been a stalwart champion on these issues for longer than anyone that I've been working with since I've been doing federal work. He was first elected to the House of Representatives in 2013 and has represented California's 29th district ever since. When it comes to America's youth, Rep. Cardinis has been a steadfast champion. His work has led to the passage of bipartisan At-Risk Youth Medicaid Protection Act, which he co-wrote with Virginia Republican Morgan Griffith. This law ensures that at-risk young people have much-needed health and mental health coverage when they re-enter the community from juvenile detention centers. The resolution acted as an extension of his work within the Bipartisan Crime Prevention and Youth Development Caucus, which he co-founded along with Congressman David Reichert of Washington during the 113th Congress. On Monday, Congressman Cardenas reintroduced H.R. 2834, the Miranda Rights for Kids Act. Please join me in giving him a very warm welcome as one of the strongest champions that we have for children in Congress. Congressman Cárdenas, thank you.
Injustice, it's just.
Thank you very much. Appreciate this opportunity for us to come together, and thank you to Human Rights for Kids and all the organizations to help bring us together today on this important announcement of legislation that my good friend Karen Bass, my colleague, will be introducing. And also, I'd like to applaud my colleague, Congresswoman Karen Bass, for being the leader of helping the most vulnerable among us and the most vulnerable of the most vulnerable, which is our children who are in foster care and who need all of our support and at all opportunities. And she's personally introduced many of us members of Congress every year to some of those young people to help us nurture them and show them and look them in the eye and say, you are valued, you matter, we care about you. And this is your community, this is your United States Capitol. Thank you so much, Karen, for continuing to do that beautiful, amazing, life-changing work. I grew up in Pacoima on my side of town. Let me tell you, when you did something on my side of town, you were criminalized. When you did something on the other side of town, they got you some help. And that's been going on for far, far too long, where hardworking communities, hardworking families, hardworking parents are being subjected to being told that your child is a criminal and we need to put that child behind bars. That's been going on for far too long in this country. And unfortunately, it's a tale of two cities. And I think that it's important that we continue to introduce laws and we continue to help people understand and recognize that our country, the United States of America, is the most punitive country on the planet when it comes to children. And that's why over 22 years ago, when I got elected to the state legislature, I found myself getting involved in juvenile justice because I looked around me and I said, I represent the community I grew up in. I was the only one of a handful of kids who grew up in my little neighborhood who went off to college. And I realized that that needs to change. And one of the reasons why that was happening for generations and generations is because we didn't have elected officials who actually drilled down and got to the work of helping our children, to getting on the front end of this issue. And it's really important that we understand that juvenile justice, intervention and prevention is the way that we need to nurture our children, not by continuing to fund and to help the suppression system in America continue to criminalize our children for doing things that children do all over the world in every community. When you're 10 and you're 12 and you're 14, you're 15, up until the age of 25, your brain isn't even fully developed. So why are we going to treat somebody as though they are criminals for life and then throw them away and put them behind bars for the rest of their life for something that they did when they were 15 years old? And again, I point out that in every community across America, in certain sides of town, when that child at 15 does the same thing that that poor child did on the other side of town, they say, little Billy needs help. And you better believe it, little Billy needs help. But you know, little Tavon and little Jose, they need help too. And Maria does, and Vanessa does, and every child, they deserve nurturing, not punishment. So when I was in the legislature, one of the first things that I did is I worked and passed the Shift Cardinis Juvenile Justice Crime Prevention Act, which put over $120 million a year into intervention prevention programs around the state of California. And it is the most funded state level program in the history of the United States. What I'd like to announce, hopefully one of these days, that it is not the most funded, that we have every state doing the same thing, every state getting on the front of this issue, and every state treating our children like human beings instead of treating them as though we need to throw them away when they get involved in doing something that maybe they should not have done. In Congress, I've continued to advocate for the development of juvenile justice. When I was on the city council, I harnessed all the money that we were sending to organizations around the city, and we forced them to tell us, what are your outcomes? Are these outcome-based programs? You need to make sure that when you take these precious dollars and take these to our most vulnerable communities, that you are doing the work that needs to be done. And thank God we now have professors and others who have gotten involved over the last 20 and 30 years who are proving to the American people that these child predators, that some ridiculous individual put out a fake report in the 1980s and 90s that resulted in punitive measures that actually put our children behind bars for longer periods of time for the same crime that an adult would commit. Again, that is backwards thinking. That is Neanderthal type legislation. And thank God that we are seeing less and less of that. And we are seeing more and more members of Congress, members of city councils, county supervisors, and every level of elected officials starting to realize that we have to get off of being stuck on stupid and make sure that we start to fund community-based organization, proven outcome-based programs. And another thing that I'm going to point out, and Karen and I know this because we both emanate from California, and California has proven that we spend over $200,000 to keep a child behind bars in California per year. Community-based programs can cost as little as $2,000, $3,000. Entire wraparound programs that help the mother, the father, and everybody in that family to help nurture that family into a better place costs no more than $20,000. And that is to help everybody in the home. So again, when I say stuck on stupid, I'm not exaggerating. It is what society would dare ignore the fact that you spend $200,000 a year, not to rehabilitate, but just to warehouse a young human being, where you can actually take 1/10 of that money and actually give that child the nurturing and the support that they deserve and need with proven outcome-based programs and actually help the family as well. That is what we need to do. And that's what today's press conference is about. It's about us realizing that we can do better. For example, one of the bills that I'm introducing is Protecting Miranda Rights for Kids Act, which will strengthen due process protections for children at the point of entry into the justice system. This bill is modeled after a similar law that has been enacted in California, and it will help ensure that constitutional rights for all children are protected by requiring that they have legal assistance prior to and during any custodial interrogation by law enforcement. These protections are supported by organizations like Human Rights for Kids, as well as the UN Committee on Rights of the Child. In addition to the bill, I'll be introducing a legislative package in the upcoming weeks that includes multiple bills that seek to reform the juvenile justice system and criminal justice system. While I'm glad that my home state of California is doing a much better job today than in the past when it comes to passing laws that are overwhelmingly helping our children and putting them in the right place of nurturing rather than being punitive with them. Don't take my word for it. Just listen to stories of young people like Javier, Michael, and Laura who experienced the trauma of a broken system as children. Their experience are exactly why we must continue our work to enhance critical youth programs and services to help prevent young people from entering and re-entering a life of crime. And that includes ensuring equitable access to resources for youth of color who have been disproportionately subjected to the brunt of the punitive system. I look forward to working with all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in Congress to prioritize protecting the rights of children and reform our criminal justice system. And I look forward to the questions that you have for us. Thank you.
Congressman, thank you so much. And again, if I could, I'd stand and give you a standing ovation. That was really inspiring, and thank you for just your steadfast commitment to this. And you've been hitting the pavement and pounding the gavel for as long as I can remember, and I can't tell you how much it means to advocates who sort of just toil in the trenches, trying to win one heart and one mind at a time. To hear you speak is inspiring for us. So thank you so much. Thank you. So now I have the distinguished honor to introduce really the face behind this. Each one of these bills by Congresswoman Bass, Congressman Cárdenas, and Congressman Westerman are directly informed by internationally accepted human rights norms. They're all found in the documents of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child or the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights that have been embraced the world over. I think what we have done to our next speakers can aptly be described as a crime against humanity. Certainly it's a crime against our children. The first speaker that we're going to hear from is a dear friend of mine. We have spent many hours and many years on airplanes and in state legislatures, from flying on rinkety-dink airplanes into the capital of Pierre, South Dakota, folks probably didn't even know Pierre was the capital of South Dakota, but it is. To driving, to across the state of the Badlands, to one by one get states to ban the use of life without parole sentences for children during my time at the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth. And Xavier is an inspiration. He is the co-executive director of the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth. He is somebody who really is a hero. I don't think that there's any way to really sum up what Xavier means to me personally or to the broader movement, and how much his work has transformed the landscape of ending the use of life without parole sentences for children. And so, Xavier, I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor to talk about and share whatever you want to drive home the importance of each of these bills that are before us today.
I can't talk behind that intro, James. Oh man, it's interesting because, well, first I just want to say thank you, Congresswoman Bass and Congressman Cardinis and Congressman Waterman, who's not here. James, it's interesting because when you open up for this live Facebook event, like you listed off a number of things about the current state of our country and the current standard of decency of how we treat kids. And I had to fight back tears and had to go off camera. And the reason why is because, the sad reality is that, the 1980s and 90s was a time that I was growing up, and yes, I experienced a lot of the worst of what society had to offer a child, but to think it's still happening today, to think it's still happening today is what really, really hurts me. We know so much now more, we know so much more now than we ever have, as a country, the emergence of adolescent brain development research, the understanding that kids are very young, at a young age, and, are very impetuous, risk-taking, and impulsive, that kids respond to trauma in adverse ways that it manifests in their lives through poor decisions and mistakes and bad behavior. I read a quote not long ago, I don't remember who wrote it, but it said that a child does not know how to ask for what they don't know they need. A child does not know how to ask for what they don't know they need. And I swear that just really defines my childhood. And when I look at, these wonderful provisions in this package of legislation to advance the human rights for children, it's also really a checklist of all the things that went wrong in my life. Mine is getting life without parole. I was fortunate not to get that consequence because I had an advocate, Herschel Connors, a public defender in the courtroom, who reminded them who I really was, that I was a child. I would just simply say that, as someone who's now fighting alongside many others, in particular, those who have been inside the system, much like Laura and Michael, and coming together when we talk and we process some of our past experiences, the dominant theme that we connect on, sadly, is the trauma. About 2 years ago, we went to Woodbury, a camp for really a retreat location that many people perhaps go to just to spend time with families, marriages, special events. We went there, about 17 of us, along with CFSY staff, ICANN members, all of us who were in the system young. And what I'll never forget is when we opened up our conversation and we talked about the things we went through, the dominant themes of being physically abused, men crying about their childhood and having to endure sexual abuse, young girls talking about the women who were young girls once upon a time and given life without parole, sharing about the most shameful things that they experienced, and then coming to realize that they were victims too. The victimization that we experience in some of our communities with the violence is one thing. When you look at the generational trauma, the compounded, the toxic combination of trauma with poverty and the underdeveloped brain, like it's so easy for a child to go down a dark road. I think about this legislation as trying to fill those cracks But I can tell you this, for a child who's living in an environment like that, those cracks feel like a bottomless pit. Those cracks feel like something they have no control over. My first arrest happened when I was 9 years old. I walked into a grocery store, I was hungry, and I couldn't resist that candy bar. At 9 years old, I was handcuffed, taken to the police station. My mother came and signed me out. That was my very first arrest. I'm literally looking at my juvenile arrest record right here, right now. If you look very closely, shoplifting. Soon after that, my next arrest was for disorderly. I don't remember what that was for, but about a month and a half, actually a few months later, I got arrested for theft from a parking meter, stealing quarters out of a parking meter. I was hungry. I was living in poverty. I see those as opportunities where they could have said, wait a minute, why is this 9-year-old kid stealing from the store? Why is this 9-year-old kid taking quarters out of parking meters? Why is he walking as far as he can outside his neighborhood to commercial spaces, to amongst strangers in the late night, picking quarters because I was hungry? And not to mention the times when I got arrested for criminal trespassing the property, breaking and entering, CDTP to private property. All those instances were times when I was trying to escape my stepfather who was abusing us and choosing to sleep in a dark, abandoned, and scary building. I'd much rather having experienced that in the night in a violent community than to have to hide underneath the covers or in my closet to escape the wrath of an abusive alcoholic stepfather. These are the things that people don't talk about in the courtroom. Sadly, at age 12, I was placed in a group home. They took me away from my mother. Instead of going into my home and seeing what was wrong, recognizing that there was something very deeply wrong here. Growing up, I used to hear my mother talk to herself. She used to have hallucinations. My brother, the same. One time I walked into the bathroom, he called himself drowning spirits in the bathtub, fully clothed, pointing to the bullets, to the bubbles, crying, stating that it was drowning the spirits. And so for me, having to grow up in that environment that was both violent and reality was distorted, and I was hungry, of course I ran to the gang. Sadly, in my community, that was the most advanced social institution within my reach. Sadly. But how do we replace that for a child in the community, much like the one I grew up in the back of the yards in the south side of Chicago? How do we go into these communities and create safety nets and opportunities and resources for kids who are contending with ailments in their lives for which they have no control? And sadly, those things which often manifest in very devastating ways. By the time I was 13 years old, I had 19 arrests and 7 convictions. How does a 13-year-old child have 19 arrests and 7 convictions? Help me understand that. My last arrest was something that I am to this very day deeply remorseful of. I was arrested and I was charged at age 13, and I was convicted of a homicide, a gang-related murder of which I was a part of. I didn't lay a finger on Pedro, but I was guilty. I was taken to the police station after being held over for a weapons charge. Again, I'm 13. Taken to the police station at the homicide unit, and while there, was beaten and coerced into a confession. And though I was remorseful and was willing to confess the things I had done, I was also coerced into saying things I did not do. Why does a 13-year-old child have to be met at the police station with such adversity, hostility, and abuse, sanctioned child abuse, and not have the presence of my mother, not have the presence of a lawyer or someone there to advise me? Why, at the age of 13, when the judge looked down upon me and said that I was incorrigible and instantly transferred me into the adult system, he didn't look into my background to understand all the traumas that I experienced. The time that, in fact, just months ago, I had ran away from a group home called Maryville because I had witnessed the accidental killing of Wakita Wallace, a 13-year-old child who was my next door neighbor from my bedroom. I was running from trauma. I wasn't a monster. And I made mistakes. And I went to the streets because I felt like I had nowhere else to go. I hope these laws allow our kids to have somewhere to go. I hope these laws don't allow our children to to be deemed as monsters and thrown away. You know, I know I'm not articulate here. It doesn't sound pretty, and I probably look ugly as hell right now, but I don't care. I just want you all to know that our kids deserve better. And I hope that our legislators and others across the country recognize that it's their responsibility. No child is born bad, and it's just that simple. If a child is arrested, it's our fault. It's our responsibility. Yes, we hold them accountable, but in age-appropriate, trauma-informed, and most importantly, racially equitable ways. Every kid around me was Black and brown. And that's a reality when I grew up in the system. And I just hope that we embrace this legislation as a way forward, as an important first and very crucial step in helping to evolve, you know, a new standard of decency that ensures kids are viewed as untapped potential, no matter where they've come from, no matter what mistakes they've made. No child should ever be redeemed as a throwaway. And so I just want to applaud our Congress folks who are willing to stand up to be the face of this. You know, there are countless others who are just like me, who are part of a great national network, and even others who are outside that network, called the Incarcerated Children's Advocacy Network. They were all convicted of homicide-related offenses and/or sentenced to life without parole when they were kids. But most importantly, their lives are indicative of the great potential of all our kids to be able to come out, stand up, do something better, get back to the communities, thrive, and become someone better. And that's because they were met with opportunity, with forgiveness, compassion. And I'll just end with this and what I often hear James say: mercy is justice too. Thank you all.
I apologize. I know that it's not my turn to speak, but I just want to thank you, Javier, for saying what you've said. And to be met with compassion, respect, and love is what happens on the other side of town, on the first incident. And in your case, it appears that you were met with the opposite on the first incident, which didn't help prevent the second incident, et cetera, et cetera. And the system just swallowed you up. And that's why those of us who are elected to make laws, we must not give up, and we must continue to change our punitive system. So sorry, I just had to say that. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you.
I love you, Xavier. And if it wasn't any clear before Xavier just spoke, it should be clear now. We absolutely have to change the way the system treats children. It is a moral imperative, and I would submit the most pressing moral issue facing our nation. We shouldn't be locking up 9-year-old children because they're hungry and bringing them into the system. There are so many different human rights abuses, and I know that we have to continue to move through this program here. And so I'm gonna, as I fight back tears, I'm gonna introduce another incredible man, another hero to the movement, and somebody who's just done an incredible amount of advocacy work in changing the way that young people who make some of the worst mistakes are treated in the justice system. And oh man, I'm a really emotional guy too. So like that, you know, that did it for me. And I feel like I'm just gonna keep going here. Michael Mendoza is the National Advocacy Director at the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, which, if I didn't mention earlier, they are also a lead co-sponsor of this event and have been helping to push these reforms since the beginning. Michael is a native of California who was tragically sentenced to life without parole in violation, again, of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And since he's been home, has been doing an incredible job fighting for youth like him. And so, Michael, I'm going to go ahead and transition and let you speak, because I really can't anymore.
Thank you, James. You know, I'm right there with you in this incredible moment where I actually just want to first start off by thanking our Congress members, Karen Bass, Tony Cárdenas, and Bruce Westerman on what has been a long time coming. In terms of having bipartisan legislation and our leaders in this country come together to ensure that our children are treated appropriately within the criminal justice system. You know, and this is what this package is going to do. It's going to mostly allow children like myself, who at the time in the mid-90s was given a life sentence and given up on and thrown away. I can't overstate how important these bills are to look at what we have already seen in terms of outdated laws that science and data and research have already proven do not work. And as you mentioned, I know all too well from my own personal experience, growing up as a Mexican-American kid in Southern California during the mid-90s. And while in the 10th grade, I made the worst decision of my life. I decided to participate in the gang-related murder that took the life of another young man and caused harms that rippled through his family and through the larger community that I will forever regret. But the message was clear then, that I did not deserve age-appropriate services, nor did I deserve a second chance. And that is until policy saved my life. In 2013, after serving 17 years of my sentence, the California law had changed and passed Senate Bill 260, which allowed me to prove that I was no longer that 15-year-old kid anymore, that I was somebody that was worthy of mercy, of hope, of redemption, and a second chance that this country values and believes in. Xavier did a great job of even talking about how most of us in impoverished communities grow up with trauma. And when we are met with responses from the criminal justice system that are not age appropriate, those traumas become further exacerbated. And it became true when even at the age of 17, I was transferred to adult prisons and basically grew up in adult prisons for close to 2 decades serving my sentence. There are no age-appropriate services in adult prisons for kids. You are met with violence. You have to prioritize your safety rather than rehabilitation. And I think if it wasn't for the bill that had saved my life and allowed me to prove that I was no longer that kid anymore, I would still be in there to this day. It's hard to continue to imagine that it's taken this long, but I can't just continue to be grateful to the leadership that we have and to the opportunity that I know these bills will provide to other children across the country and people who are still stuck in prisons behind these outdated laws. Like I did in 2014, once I was given a chance to prove that I was no longer that kid, I was vigorously and rigorously interviewed by a parole board agency with a panel of experts who knew what to look for and how to do their jobs and to provide public safety to our communities. And when they were given the opportunity to see how I have grown and matured, how I had prioritized education, vocation, and prepared in every way I could to come home back to my family, they saw that, yes, I was a child who was not irredeemable, but had the opportunity to continue to give back. And I was successfully paroled in 2014. And since then, I have just become very passionate about advocating and telling my story and ensuring that legislators who are making these laws and making these policy changes have a face to the name that they're seeing, and understanding that we are human beings that made a terrible choice, but also deserve a second chance. And that's what we're all here for during this month of second chance opportunities. And I just can't thank you all enough for this opportunity. I know all of us at the Anti-Recidivism Coalition are definitely excited about this push and about making it a bipartisan effort that this country needs more so now than ever when continuing to reform the criminal justice system. So I just want to continue to thank all of you, and we'll be excited about continuing to push this forward and making sure that we continue to protect our children, not only in different states, but across the country. Thank you, James.
Thank you so much, Michael. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our last speaker of the day, Ms. Laura Berry. Laura and I met many years ago, again, back when I was at the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth. Arkansas was one of the states that had been a leader on ending life without parole sentences for children. It did so back in 2017. And that's the policy shift that Michael referred to earlier is what has given so many people the hope of a second chance and the opportunity to come home. And Laura certainly took that opportunity and ran with it. And since she's been home, she has been a resource and a support system for so many other former juvenile lifers who've also got that second chance in her home state of Arkansas. She has fought for women who, unfortunately and tragically, have been the victims of shackling when they were pregnant, pregnant women and girls who've been placed in solitary confinement. She has just been just a stalwart advocate for the people and the women that she left behind. And it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Laura Berry. Laura.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Congresswoman Bass and Congressman Cardinis and Congressman Westerman, who I met in 2018, shortly after I came home. And I just want to say that for so many reasons, placing a child into an adult facility for something they did as a child is just atrocious. I entered the system at the age of 17 from being convicted of murder and sentenced to life without parole for something that my ex-boyfriend had done. I was involved in an abusive relationship, placed in a adult prison, directly into solitary. I was pregnant when I was arrested. My child was taken not only from me, but from my family. And I know the acts that I was involved in destroyed my victim's family, my parents, and so many people. And then to enter the prison and be placed into an adult facility and then into solitary confinement was the most scariest thing I can ever think of. And during my time of incarceration, I was assaulted by a correctional officer and I became pregnant. And at that point, because of that torturous act that should have destroyed me completely, it actually turned my life around because I was pregnant with a child from that act. And because I don't believe in abortion, I was left with trying to become a better person for that child and wanting better for him. And in order to provide better for him, I had to be a better person. And it changed my life around in prison in the state of Arkansas. As a juvenile serving a life without parole sentence, I was denied education. So to be denied that education, I had to find ways to educate myself to become that better person. And I began mentoring other young people as they came in the prison to help them avoid being victims while they were incarcerated. In 2017, Arkansas passed a law that made me eligible for parole after 32.5 years. I was the first and only woman released under that law in Arkansas, and the first overall to be released under that law in the state of Arkansas. And I came home. I was blessed to have my attorney and his wife help me navigate and learn to be an adult in society for the first time. And then I created a support group for other people because there was nothing offered to me other than their support and the campaign support for me to be somebody when I came home. So I wanted other people to have a chance instead of being set up for failure when they re-entered society. I then became involved in wanting to see the laws change. I met Congressman Westerman, Senator Letting, and Representative Rebecca Petty in 2018. And ever since, I've been working to change the laws to make things better for the people I left behind. And I just want to say, when I went before the parole board, it was the hardest interrogation I feel like I'd ever experienced. But at the same time, for the first time, I was being seen for the person I was today and not for the one worst mistake I ever made in my life. So for all the right reasons, I support this package and everything it'll mean for the people that we've left behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. And thank you to all of our incredible panelists and speakers today, and especially everyone who shared deeply from their heart. I know that this is very difficult to share some of the worst things that have ever happened to us. And so I just appreciate your strength, resilience, and courage. And to our members of Congress for staying on this entire time. It speaks volumes about your commitment to this issue, and we just really appreciate you. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Karma, who's going to help facilitate Q&A from members of the press. Karma.
Hi, everyone. My name is Karma El-Musa. I'm the Communications Director at the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth, working with James on this event. And thanks to all our panelists for your incredible words today. I'm just going to start by typing my email into the chat here so that if you have a question that you think of after this is over for one of our panelists, you can send it my way. And also our press toolkit for those who haven't seen it yet. Folks, if you just want to raise your hands, I can try to unmute those who have questions. If there's anybody who has a question on the line and you go ahead and use the little raise hand emoji at the bottom, I can select you. Don't see anyone so far. James, am I doing this right? I should see if
I think so. Do you see there's one question from a reporter from Vice News in the chat box. Do you see that, Karma? I can read it too.
Yeah, go for it. I don't see
Okay.
it for some reason.
Hello, reporter with Vice News here. Have these bills already been introduced? If so, what are the bill ID numbers?
For my Miranda bill, I don't have a bill number ready for you right now. I'll try to see if my staff can give me whatever information I could forward to you. Thank you.
We'll have a bill number tomorrow. It's being introduced tomorrow. Friday, I'm sorry. Can I just take a moment? I'm gonna have to go, but I just really want to thank you guys for your testimonies. And it's just so hard to hear because it's just such a profound injustice. And I just feel like our country doesn't have any idea what happens to our kids. I mean, we have the juvenile injustice system, as far as I'm concerned, is just set up for Black and brown kids and poor kids. That's it. I mean, you know, Representative Cardinis said it over and over again. I mean, if you're from another side of town, you're a troubled youth and you need help. And the idea of putting handcuffs on a 9-year-old is just out of my comprehension. State-sponsored child abuse, it is a human rights concern. And I just thank you so much for being willing to open up, and just really want to congratulate you for your success. And I just look forward to continue working with you until we can change this. I'm just so sorry that you had to go through that.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Do you have any questions, Karma? And also, while we're waiting for Karma to interject, Javier, I know your name is Xavier, but I say Javier because it's a sign of respect for Latinos to
I love it.
give
I love
you
it.
that
My
Latino name.
stepfather called me Javier all my life.
Okay.
And it's interesting because even my uncles and a lot of my family members say Javier. So it was a great to hear that.
I did figure out where the question was located. So if anyone else has one to type in, feel free to go ahead and do that, or raise your hand and I can unmute you. And if not, and our panelists have anything else to say, they can feel free to have a last word before we sign off here.
I know Congresswoman Bass had to excuse herself, but I'll be able to hang out for a few more minutes. And I just wanted to say that for those of you who are not in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, what I want everybody to appreciate is when Karen Bass started doing what she's doing, and I started doing what I've been doing for over 20 years, we were villainized as elected officials. Even Democrats in the progressive state of California were not willing to stand with us. They were willing to tell us, I agree, in conversation, but to actually vote for legislation that actually did away with these punitive measures, did away with these over-the-top treating children like less than adults, because they're what I mean by less than adults, I'm telling you, there are laws on the books across America where if you're a 15-year-old and you commit the same crime as a 21-year-old, you get more time. I mean, how in the world does that make any sense? But those laws were put on the books because somebody decided that they were going to lie and say that in America, we are going to be faced with super predator children, which was a complete and total lie. And it flourished like negativity does, right? It just flourished all over the country. And then a bunch of elected officials ran for office saying, I'm going to be tough on crime. People were already elected, so I'm going to be tough on crime. And we just saw this over-the-top legislation in all corners of the country. So I just want to tell you that we are in a better place. We're not there yet, but we're in a better place right now where it is much more acceptable and there's much less fear from elected officials to do the right thing, to sign on to bills, to vote for bills, to advocate for bills that are saying we need to nurture our children, we not punish them. We need to treat them like human beings, not like something we can throw away. And so I just want to let you know that we have a long way to go, but believe me, 20 years ago, it was something that was shunned upon by people on every side of the aisle.
Thank you, Congressman. I just wanted to make sure that the Vice News reporter saw these answers in the chat too, that Congressman Westerman's bill is HR 2858, and that you can email Congressman Cardinis' office once that is introduced. Do we have one more chance for questions? We're almost at time anyway, but before we go, and again, my email's there in the chat. If you think of anything afterwards, I'm happy to help.
I just want to say very quickly, thank you, Congressman Cardenas. I was reminding you earlier about a time we had in 2018, 2017, when our ICANN members were there at our convening and others, and we had a chance to hear from you. And your commitment to this cause is really a blessing to all of us and to children of today. You're right. It wasn't always the trendy thing to do. It wasn't always the popular thing to do, and that is to advocate for kids who made horrible mistakes. And so I just want to say thank you for championing this. We're behind you and others who pick up this important cause. Thank you.
Look, thank you, Javier. And one thing that I want to emphasize, in America, only children, especially children on the poor side of town, white, black, brown, etc., will be charged with 10, 15, 20 years or more, and they did not personally commit the act. White collar crimes in America, you will not find an executive with a corporation that cheated millions or billions of dollars from somebody who is shoulder to shoulder with the person who actually did the crime. You will not see them be charged and or try to convict them and give them the same amount of time as the person who actually committed the act. I hope that you understand I hope I'm being clear enough on that. It's only when it comes to crimes that are assumed to be done by poor people and poor children that they have laws on the books where it says, for example, if somebody was driving in the car and they pulled into a parking lot and one person had a gun and one person went into that liquor store and came out and robbed that liquor store, that everybody in that vehicle is charged with the same crime. And in some cases, the child in that car, say it's a 21-year-old who actually did the act and a 15-year-old is in the car, the system allows that 15-year-old to be charged with more time than the person who actually committed the crime. Even if that 15-year-old testifies over and over, I did not know that the guy who drove into the parking lot had a gun. I did not know the act that he was going to do. It was not premeditated by the people in the car. That person, that 15-year-old can still, and there's proof that there are case after case after case where the laws allow that 15-year-old to be charged with a crime that is with time that is more egregious than the person who committed the act. You will not find a law in America that says as a white collar criminal, you can be charged with equal or more time than the person who committed the act. So what I'm saying is these laws, in my opinion, are actually created to be more punitive to poor people in America, to people who live on the other side of town in America.
Thank you, Congressman. James, we do have one more question here. Do we have time?
Sure, we can go
Okay.
with one more.
Okay, thanks. From Natalie. Laura, I guess this is directed at you, but anyone can take it. With everything that these children have been through, some have to face powerful abusers while being incarcerated, as Laura was abused by the correctional officer. How can such issues be addressed?
I'll speak to that. As we've witnessed more and more and more lately on television, that people who have title or have a badge somehow, some way are almost immune from being held accountable for their actions. And for somebody like Laura to been abused and to experience such a horrible attack by another human being, Laura didn't mention what happened to the person who raped her, but far too often in America, again, there are protections so that people are not held accountable if you have a certain title, or especially if you have a badge in America. And those laws need to change as well. And one of the good things is we finally have a U.S. Attorney General right now who's proven literally day after day after day since he became the U.S. Attorney General that he is going to treat those individuals with the same amount of responsibility that they should be held to as anybody else, whether you have a badge or not. And again, that's just another area where we need to see progress and where we need to see equity in accountability.
Thank you.
And by the way, we do have laws that the House of Representatives has submitted and advanced across the floor of the House. It's just the United States Senate right now that hasn't taken up those laws to require more equity and to actually bring our policing, our police forces in America at the appropriate level of accountability. And President Biden does support those laws.
Thank you so much, Congressman. And I don't see, are there any other questions in there, Karma? I didn't see any.
There is one that just popped
Okay.
up for the Congressman. How we at the Anti-Recidivism Coalition and organizations in the movement help with addressing the issues highlighted?
It's something that I think comes natural to talk to people who've been victimized. But what we need to do is every single one of us needs to expand our circles so that Michael and Laura and Javier, so that you can actually, as every opportunity you have to explain and answer questions to people who don't believe your story. The people in America, when I tell them that we're the only country in the world that actually will try and convict and confine a child to prison without the possibility of parole, we're the only country in the world to do that, people don't believe it. When I tell people that a child at 15 in the same situation can get a longer sentence than somebody who's, say, in their 20s, people don't believe it. Do you understand what I'm saying? But the thing is, your stories are so, they're true, they're the truth, but they are unbelievable to the average person in America. So the bottom line is, the more that you explain and show them that this has happened, it does happen, and unless we change things, they're going to continue to happen, then we're going to have a lot of ignorance in America, and people aren't going to come up and assist us like they would once they are enlightened. So I think that the vast majority of people in America, when they're educated to these truths, will sign up, they'll help out, they'll share it on their social media or what have you, and advance the facts of the matter is, did you know this? Did you know that? Do you realize this? So I think that it's important that every single one of us continue to be the ambassadors of truth when it comes to these kinds of things that most Americans, they don't believe it. it's hard to believe.
Thank you. I think that's it, James, for what I'm seeing.
God. Well, I just want to thank everyone again. Congressman Cardinis, thank you for staying with us this entire time. Again, just really inspiring. And thank you to everyone who joined, even if you are not a reporter. We appreciate all of the support. And just again, thank you to all of the organizations that have worked to put this together and have worked to advance this comprehensive bipartisan package of criminal justice reform. It's so important that we address the system from top to bottom. Starting with establishing a minimum age of when juveniles can even be arrested and tried in the juvenile justice system, to establishing new protections for kids before they're eligible to be transferred into the adult system, and reforming the way, if a child is charged as an adult, reforming the sentences that are available and giving judges greater flexibility to end mandatory minimums, get rid of life without parole once and for all, and end these human rights abuses that we are seeing that have proliferated against our children in the justice system. Thank you again to everybody. Karma will be in touch with reporters with follow-up materials, and we look forward to seeing each one of these bills become law. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Thank you.